Imagine expanding your team's abilities without adding headcount. At Element 451, AI assistants like admissions advisors and student success coaches work alongside your staff to deliver personalized experiences at scale, offer round the clock support, and uncover data driven insights. It's not just about doing more, it's about doing it smarter. Elevate your team with an AI workforce that delivers personalized, scalable, and impactful experiences across the student lifecycle. Learn more at element451.com. Hi, I'm a former higher ed CMO, and I have a confession to make. When I started in my role as the Chief Marketing Officer at Winston-Salem State, I did not know what I was doing. And I don't mean I didn't know what I was doing from a marketing perspective or a communications perspective. I mean, I didn't know what it meant to be an executive leader. And I really wish I would have had access to Melissa Richards' new book, The 30, 60, 90-Day Handbook, Checklists for Communications and Marketing Leaders in Higher Education. Melissa is the founder of iMarketingMix and is an author, teacher, consultant, facilitator, and leadership coach with more than a decade of experience working in higher education, including as a CMO. Melissa's book is a great resource for anybody who's stepping into a new leadership role, whether that's an executive leadership role, director level, or everything in between. It's also not necessarily just for new leaders. It's for someone who wants to hone those leadership skills. Melissa's book is available through Case, and I hope you enjoy this conversation when we cover all aspects of new leadership. Welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, a podcast that empowers higher ed marketers to bring innovation, creativity, and excellence to their work. I'm your host, Jaime Hunt. Join me every 2 weeks for discussions with some of the best minds in higher education marketing. Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher educational professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. I am happy to be here with my friend Melissa Richards. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, Jaime.
I have been excited about your book since you announced it quite a while ago now, the 30, 60, 90-Day Handbook. What prompted you to write the book?
So, my idea for the book came after I presented at the 2023 CASE conference on marketing and branding. So, I presented the 30, 60, 90-day checklist. And that idea, the presentation idea, originated from my practice of creating a 30, 60, 90-day plan for myself when I start new leadership roles. So my very first 30, 60, 90-day checklist was for my first role as a vice president, and it fit onto one page. And I started developing that list by asking my current boss for advice. And I was working at Virginia Tech at the time. So Larry Hinker, who had been head of university relations for 25 years at the time at Virginia Tech, he was a terrific mentor and sponsor for me, especially as I joined Virginia Tech as my first higher ed role coming out of corporate. So I started by interviewing him for his advice. And then I interviewed my new president, where I was going at St. Lawrence University, and drafted a 30, 60, 90-day list, shared it with my new president. He was impressed, and I felt like I had secured my first win. So I continued to do that when I moved to other vice presidential roles. And after a couple of revisions, my list was pretty solid. And then colleagues who were moving into new roles would contact me for advice. And I would send them my 30, 60, 90-day checklist and encourage them to create their own. So eventually I pitched the talk for the conference, that my presentation was well received, and I realized that I had a book in my head. I had a lot of checklists. I've always loved checklists. So the content flowed pretty easily.
I love people who love checklists. My husband is a
Mhm.
checklist person. I have never been a heavy checklist user, but I feel like the checklists that you developed, they're not like your stereotypical, this is a to-do list and you're going to check off 10 things in one day, right? Like they are
Mhm.
more involved types of things. And one of the things that you talk about is building trust, earning credibility, demonstrating commitment as like the big goals for those for each 30-day phase. Why is that sequence so important?
I'm so glad you asked because the order of the sequence is important to me in my mind. I recognized that there was more than just your standard cookie cutter checklist for those 30-day windows. I wanted to have a big goal. And so I developed those and they've become what I call my three fundamentals of leadership. And I use them as a framework now in my coaching practice and my consulting practice. But the order is important. I see them as concentric rather than linear with
Mm,
trust at the core because trust is essential for every other aspect of leadership. So starting with trust, it sets the tone for how people engage with you. As we know, first impressions matter deeply. So building trust out of the gate is an excellent first impression. Do you agree?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, when people feel they can trust you, they're more likely to communicate openly with you. There's a psychological safety, and that leads to effective collaboration and respect. So that psychological safety of trust is crucial to feeling a sense of belonging, which we all know is really important, especially in higher education. And the second fundamental of leadership, credibility, is earned over time through actions. So
Mm,
while trust is a feeling, credibility is earned through actions. We bring a certain amount of credibility when we start the job. We come
mhm.
to the table with our 30, 60, 90-day plans. We have all of this experience that's listed on our resume, and we've started to build relationships through the interview process. But credibility is built by engaging authentically with others on an ongoing basis. And once you get into the job, you start taking responsibilities for your decisions and delivering results. So it's a dynamic process that grows stronger as we demonstrate reliability and integrity through our actions. And the third fundamental, commitment, completes the framework by connecting purpose and mission to the work. And as we know in higher education, we are so committed to the mission of the organization that we tend to put it first and often neglect some of the care that we need to give to ourselves and to our teams. Demonstrating commitment means showing up consistently, following through on promises, and aligning the actions with those values and the mission. So ultimately, in that concentric matrix, it rolls out like this. When leaders build trust, they earn credibility. When they deliver on their mission repeatedly, they demonstrate commitment, which then strengthens both trust and credibility.
That is so perfect. Like that is such a great summation of how those things kind of work together. And I'm thinking about, you talked about you developed this checklist for your first role as a VP. But, I have a lot of listeners who aren't VPs or AVPs, but it feels like these are things that are could be foundational for any role, not even just leadership roles, but coming into a new job or getting new leadership. We know there's lots of turnover.
Mhm.
You have a new VP come in. Would you see these as applying to beyond just senior leadership positions?
Yes, definitely. In any role, whether you're managing people or not, they're great. It's a great framework and frame of mind to take into a new role. Start by building trust, and then you're going to, do that through relationship building, and then you're going to, earn credibility through your actions on the job, and then you're going to demonstrate commitment by connecting the purpose and mission of the work that you're doing.
I love it. I love it. And I know there's so many listeners to the show that want to be CMOs someday. They want to be senior leaders someday. And I feel like practicing these things in earlier roles will make
Mhm.
it so it just comes like breathing when you get
Yes.
into a senior role.
Yes, and when I'm coaching developing leaders who are typically middle managers and aspiring to be in higher roles, I use this framework and I often encourage them to find accountability partners. So
Mm.
just not just internalizing these three fundamentals, but talking about them openly with mentors, sponsors, even your team so that they see that you're doing the work.
And one of the things I talked about this in my book, I've talked about this on some other podcasts, is I felt like when I got into my first VP role, there was a homicide on campus during homecoming. And that was a moment that kind of did all three things in one fell swoop in a way. I people had to trust me. I had to do everything right. I had to build that trust quickly. I had to earn that credibility quickly by,
Hmm.
performing well in this crisis situation, and then demonstrate that I was going to have continued commitment to the excellence that we demonstrated during that crisis and the transparency and all of that through the crisis. But not everybody has like a moment, hopefully, early in their
Hmm.
tenure in a leadership position. Are there other more like mini moments, or how do you build those just in sort of a standard operations when you're not in a crisis mode?
I mean, ideally, you have time to prepare. That's the
Right.
whole premise of the 30, 60, 90-day plan. But we don't always write crisis into that plan, and we probably should. I mean, you and I share the experiences of having led a lot of crisis.
Hmm.
I as I was trying to heal from mentally from some of the crises that I had been leading, I took the time to write them all down. It's a page and a half
It's
of
awful.
bullet points, right?
It's
It's
the
a lot.
job,
It's
right?
heavy. It's
Yeah.
heavy. And there were moments where I felt I was really strong at leading through crisis, but eventually you get worn down and you have to you have to heal yourself, otherwise you can't lead others. So I think going back to your question about mini moments, I think visualizing some scenarios in your 30, 60, 90-day plan is a good idea. It's not something I did in the beginning, but reflecting on it in hindsight, it's a great exercise to sketch out some of the things that might happen. And you should probably include a major crisis in there because so many of us are facing a major crisis on our
Yeah.
campus in the first 90 days.
Oh, for sure. I mean, if you're listening to this and you're about to step into a leadership role, I can't tell you. I mean, my first VP role, there was a homicide 4 weeks in on campus during homecoming with a lockdown and a suspect at large on campus. During my beginning of my first role at Miami, it was the middle of COVID, and we had a international story about students diagnosed and testing positive for COVID, having parties to like
Hmm.
infect their friends, and then ODU had a crisis that I'm not going to get into here because it didn't actually get press attention. So I don't want to
Yeah,
publicize it.
keep it.
So I would say, and I'm guessing, Melissa, you've had the same experience where it's like you get into a role and definitely within those 90 days, you're going to have some sort of scenario that
Yes.
you would never wish on someone else.
Yes. And in fact, I can think of 2 instances where I was interviewing for major roles, one of which I accepted, the other which I declined. It wasn't related to the interview experience. There were a lot of other factors I was considering, but in both of those scenarios, a crisis happened while I was on campus for my interview days.
Oh my
I thought I
gosh.
was gonna have to step in. I thought I was gonna be pulled into the crisis management.
Wow.
One was a murder had taken place in
Well,
the
you were
student
there.
while I was there. I was literally watching my future boss on television being interviewed,
Oh my gosh.
in the from my hotel room where I was gonna be having breakfast with him the next morning. And, the other one was a serial stalker
Oh my
on campus.
gosh.
So at that while I was there, the stalker was, attempting to assault women on campus at night, and it happened for like the ninth time in a row, while I was there. So
Oh my
yeah, so
gosh.
crisis unfortunately is just something now that we have to put in our toolkit from the very beginning.
Yeah, for sure. So, going back to the book, in those first 30 days, you really emphasize building that trust, like we talked about.
Hmm.
What are some common missteps that you've seen new leaders make that undermines that trust early on? And I would stress, I feel like it's very difficult once you've undermined trust to get it back. So I think this is really an important thing to talk about.
Yes, absolutely. It takes a lot longer to rebuild trust once it's broken than it takes to build up the trust equity.
Mm,
Um, but this is why being, trust is number one on my list. And being consistent is number one in my checklist for building trust. Following through on commitments is essential. And when you start in a new role, and we see this all the time, we've done it, we see it from others, it's easy to fall into the trap of wanting to please and impress everyone,
mm-hmm.
right? How many times do we go in, we're managing communications and marketing teams who say, we're order takers. Yet we go in and we continue to overpromise things that we can't deliver, right? So new leaders tend to overpromise and they put
Mm,
themselves and their teams at risk of underdelivering or committing to projects that don't align with strategic priorities. So
mm,
we have to
right.
be the leader in the sense that we're selecting the strategic moves, and sometimes that means saying not right now. We don't have to be a house of no, but you don't have to
Right.
be a total house of yes. You can be a house of yes on strategic priorities. And when you make too many promises, you don't come across as a strategic leader.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you can't deliver on the promises, people don't trust you. So that's one of the top reasons that trust is number one going through the door. You're in there building those relationships and being asked a lot of things. When you meet with your fellow executive peers, they're handing you their wish lists.
Yes. All the things the last person didn't do for them that they hope you will say yes
Yes,
to. Yeah.
correct.
And another thing that I would like to touch on in this trust building phase is I don't feel like trust is just for external, it's also the trust of your team. And how do you recommend
Mhm.
people build that trust with the people that report to them?
So it's the same principles. It's about showing up and creating that first impression that you are going to be honest and authentic. And you're going to replicate that again and again. You're going to listen and you're going to communicate well. And that is, you'll do that individually with team members and you'll do that with your team as a whole. I think it's really important to think carefully about how you structure team meetings, for example,
Mm,
so that you're not dictating out, they're not just reading off their to do list. You're having fruitful conversations and really getting to the heart of intent and the why of things.
that makes sense. That makes sense. And you talk in the book about authenticity, vulnerability, compassion. To me, those are signs of a good leader. But why
Mhm.
do you think those are especially essential in this moment in higher education?
Especially essential right now.
Yeah.
Higher education is experiencing an all-time turnover of leaders, as you know. It's
Mhm.
continuing, unfortunately. And any kind of leadership turnover, even for a very valid reason, affects organizational stability, and it can lead to a leadership crisis. And then furthermore, as we're seeing a reputational crisis for higher education altogether. So I'm sure you saw the results of Inside Higher Ed's student voice survey that they did with Generation Lab last spring. It's been about a year. That study indicates that students trust professors the most and the president and other senior leaders the least.
Mm,
So authenticity, vulnerability, and compassion are the three things that you named. They're all related to human connection.
mhm,
People trust people. So authenticity and leadership allows all of the constituents internally, starting with internal constituents, students, faculty, staff, also alumni, to see you as another human being, including one who makes mistakes occasionally. So
mhm.
vulnerability means that you have the courage to own up to your mistakes and you use your trust currency that you started building from the beginning to help correct and navigate the situation. Compassion reflects your ability to hear and respond in an authentic manner. And you can have empathy by relating to the perspective and experiences of others. But as you talk about in your book, Jamie, compassion includes the next step of wanting to help.
Mhm.
right? Just sitting around and saying and having sympathy isn't enough. You need to have deeper empathy, which then leads to compassion and action. And so leaders see and understand, and then they take action.
I love that. And I've been on a soapbox with my newsletter and on LinkedIn lately about like this is the time for leaders that do all three of those things. They're authentic,
Yes.
they're vulnerable, they're compassionate, they have empathy. They understand that the moment that we're all living in right now is so full of uncertainty and angst that they
Yes.
can't just be silent. Even if there's things that you can't say for, myriad reasons, you have to say something. You have to understand that
Hmm.
people are concerned and that lack of saying something creates a void that people fill with fear. And I just think a really good leader, if you have this checklist and you're focused on, building trust, earning credibility, and demonstrating commitment, that doesn't happen with silence in moments like these.
Correct. I agree.
And I think even if you're not the president, right, and you're not putting out, an institution wide message, I think that leaders of teams have an obligation to communicate with their teams, even if it's just saying, I understand these are really stressful times. I
Hmm.
understand you opened up your 401k when you shouldn't have and looked at that number or,
Hmm.
fill in the blank. But, that sort of I don't want to say comforting, but I'm going to say comforting the team or showing compassion to the team isn't something that should only be left to the president either.
Agree. Agree. It's people trust people. And who's closest to you in the organization? Your
Mhm.
peers, your supervisor, and then it goes up. So if you're relying, if middle managers and senior leaders are relying on the president to create all those connections, they'll be waiting for a long time. It's
Yeah.
impossible.
Even on small campuses, it's
Hmm.
impossible for the president to connect with every single person. But every
Yes.
single person needs a connection and deserves a connection, is worthy of a connection.
Yes.
So
That's
that's
human dignity. We all deserve that.
exactly.
Hmm.
So in this moment, right, we're living in a moment in higher ed that is just a lot. But there's also this has been an escalating level of stress on college campuses, particularly among senior leadership. During my time and tenure as a leader, during your time and tenure as a leader, I'm sure you saw too this sort of build up of pressures and stress. What advice do you have for leaders who are overwhelmed by just the sheer scope of marketing and communications in higher ed today, layering on all those pressures and the uncertainty of our political world in 2025?
Well, and in addition to that stress, our portfolio is growing
Yes.
extensively, right? It
Yeah.
continues. The Office of Communications has evolved from what was once just a news bureau to a
Mhm.
full service communications, constituent relations, marketing agency.
Yeah.
I presented last week at a conference and I named all the different chief titles that we're carrying from chief marketing officer, chief communications officer, but also chief issues officer, chief experience officer. I argue that we can also be chief trust officer. So
Yeah.
I'm just adding to the portfolio. But, so in order to manage that stress and the feeling of being overwhelmed, I believe that leaders need to first do our research. We need to get organized so that we can break it all down. It's really big and unwieldy when we're thinking about it as this big, massive, um, hairy thing. So we need to know what's required of us, what our strengths are as leaders, and how to fill the gaps.
Mhm.
We don't have to be everything. We don't have to know everything. We need to get comfortable with that. What we need to do is sort through the critical and the urgent and the strategic versus the operational demands. So, as we know, our president has expectations, our board has expectations. Also, there are initiatives that we know our divisions have to achieve in order to further the mission and the institutional strategic plans. But we have to be okay that we can't do it all. It's about organizing, setting realistic goals, breaking down the operations, and identifying required resources, including the people we need on our teams.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, take good care of yourself and your team. That's vulnerability. Being vulnerable means admitting that you too need compassion and care for your whole self. And it means doing things that we have often put off, like taking days off, like spending time with our friends and family without multitasking, not
Mhm.
checking email,
Mhm.
not reading your email on the boat, Jamie, while you are trying to take some downtime. We have to think about eating well, our sleep habits, and identifying people in our life who can be our support network. I personally think hiring a leadership coach is a great idea to
Mhm.
have as a sounding board, which is one of the reasons I shifted and pivoted in my career at this point with my experience to really lead from the side and help support others in these leadership roles that can be so stressful right now.
The next era of higher ed is here. AI that's both scalable and deeply human. At the 2025 Engage Summit, learn how to use agentic AI to personalize outreach, engage proactively, and free time for what matters most. This Don't Miss event is happening June 24th and 25th in Charlotte. Enrollify listeners get $50 off with code Enrollify50. Don't wait. Register at engage.element451.com. Yeah, that's such great advice. I was just interviewed for a podcast yesterday where I talked about how I think coaches can really make a huge difference
Hmm.
in sort of stretching our ability to cope with the challenges that we're facing. And, it's another person you can bounce things off of. It's another person that can find and see things that maybe you're not quite seeing as clearly as you could be. It's just such a great resource. And I would also say, in higher ed, we are not doing as well as the corporate world in terms of investing in leadership training and support for leaders. That historically coaches haven't been something that every leader has been given access to in higher education. Whereas I think in a lot of Fortune 500 companies and things like that, that sort of comes with the gig is you get coaching support. So I just think it's really important that even if it's something you have to invest in with your own resources, if you're stepping into a new role as a new leader and you don't have this support on your campus or through your campus, maybe taking a look at that differential in the pay that you were making before and the pay you're making now, and in your first year, invest a small part of that into having a coach. I just think it would be. I wish I had done that. I think it would speed things up quite a bit.
Yeah, it's also a great point for negotiation. So when you're negotiating your
Mm,
contract, ask your new organization to cover having a coach in, say, the first 90 days or the first 6 months.
that's great advice. Fantastic advice. I want to pivot a little bit to talk a little bit about AI because I know that's on the tops of a lot of leaders' mind right now and leading through that change. And you talk in the book about how teams are starting to train writers and editors as AI
Mhm.
prompt engineers. And I'm really curious about how you see AI changing the skill sets that leaders are going to be hiring for in the coming weeks, months, years in higher ed.
Immediately, right? It's I have been, we've always listed tools like Adobe Creative Suite and Microsoft Office products as the must-have skills for in our job descriptions. But now I'm seeing job descriptions that require experience using AI tools for tasks,
Mhm.
marketing tasks like optimizing campaign performance or customer segmentation. So I also want to say I am a true believer that humans should continue to use their creative brains to create their best work, right? We're in the creative business, but I love that AI tools can enhance what we do and make it more efficient. I had a conversation with my daughter a few days ago. I explained to her that I was I use a private instance of Perplexity so that I can upload my own content and feel comfortable with it not being distributed out without the proper citations. And one of the things that I do is I write an original, or I write original content for a newsletter every week, and then I upload it in and ask it to break it down using specifically my content to create some 1 minute video scripts
Oh,
that I
nice.
can use to post on social media. So it's using my content that I created and just recreating it in a different format. And my daughter was a little upset by that, and she said, Mom, that's a job." And I said, "Well, I'm a solopreneur with no employees.
Right.
I'm not Disney, you know, with hundreds of thousands of jobs that I need to try to consolidate at sometimes." So, it's using it in smart ways, I think. But I think it's exciting. There's lots of great uses for it. And as hiring managers, we should be seeking candidates and training our current staff on these tools and smart ways to use AI, whether it's analyzing large data sets and extracting insights from that, or just making the tasks that we're doing easier and faster on the front end while we're still requiring humans to use their smart brains for the final product.
I travel around the country and do virtual and in-person workshops training whole teams. And I
Hmm.
think that the leaders that are where the leaders are the ones that are like, we need to figure this out. We need to get our whole team to have a baseline. I think those are the leaders that are going to really help propel their universities forward because their teams are going to be able to be more productive, more creative, and more strategic because they're going to be able to offload some of those mundane tasks that are time consuming, but don't necessarily require human creativity or human
Hmm.
judgment to do. So if you
Hmm.
can offload the stuff that doesn't require that, and instead focus your time on the things that are more strategic and creative, it's just a win-win. And I think about Cassandra Jolie at Mount Holyoke, Jen Brock at Mount Holyoke, Nicole Barron at Roosevelt. Like they really saw that there was a need for their teams, there among others, to really all have that baseline skill set. And I'm really happy to see because I feel like has the potential to be one of those like grassroots things where it's people lower in the org chart are using it and figuring out how to use it, but it's not like a mandate and it's not consistently applied. So I think, if you're a leader, if you're going into a new leadership role, thinking about how you're going to implement AI in your teams, I think is really important. I would love to hear what advice you might have for those leaders who are really feeling pressure to quote unquote do something with AI, but they don't know where to start.
Yeah, and also to add on to what you just shared, Jamie, it's if we're not careful as leaders, we are going to create those generational skills gaps
Yes.
that we're so weary of. We work at
Yes.
higher education institutions where our students are learning and using AI.
Mhm.
And so we need to be sure that our teams are up to speed as well and using their creativities in new ways to continue to stretch us. So as I described, I have a private instance of Perplexity. I don't share my inputs with what I keep calling the mastermind, or the larger data hub, because that gives me the comfort of uploading my own writings without the fear that they'll be published without the proper citation. That's especially important if you're writing something that has not been published yet. And so I recommend leaders do something like that at first, just to play around. You don't have to know everything. We talked about this earlier, but it is good to know what is out there, how AI works at its core and at its most simple functions. So, subscribe to a private chat GPT, Perplexity, or other AI instance and just play around with it. Upload some articles that you've written and ask it, give it prompts, practice writing smart prompts that will um, reorganize the data or analyze some data that you upload with regards to media, earned media, for example. And a lot of the tools that we're using in our jobs in higher education, in marketing and communications, have
Mhm.
had AI tools built into them for a very long time. We weren't as surprised as some others when AI really became so popular so fast. But I think that understanding how some of those are working, even if it's just sitting down with a team member who's managing your HubSpot CRM, or um, who is managing any number of the applications that we're using in our work and just getting a basic understanding. Even things like note takers for Zoom
Mhm.
calls, for
Mhm.
example. But listen to your team members who are already building their AI skills, whether you've required it of them or not. I assure you, they are out there exploring.
Oh, for sure. And I think I would really caution leaders, don't think of this as being something you can offload understanding onto your team. And
Yes.
because I think of it as this is like email. This is like the internet, right? This is not like, some really specific Adobe Photoshop or something where maybe you as a
Right.
VP don't need to understand it. This is something where if you do not grasp and use these technologies, you will be obsolete. I really
Yes.
do believe that.
Yes,
And
it's a
so,
moment. It's a moment where, I worked in technology before I came to higher education. And I like to say I was in charge of marketing the cloud and apps that run in the cloud before it had that fancy name. So it was really hard because but once Microsoft finally called it the cloud and it took off, we're having another moment like that with
mhm,
AI. It's not going to go away. It's
mm-mm.
going to get smarter. We're going to have more uses of it. So it's really about grasping it. And, again, you don't have to know it all, but having a basic understanding as a leader is really important.
How would you recommend a leader incorporate AI or AI exploration or whatever into their 30, 60, 90-day plans?
Okay, I love this question. I love this question because I was not using AI when I first created my checklist. So reflecting on this in hindsight gives me a lot of great ideas, actually. So, one way to use it would be to brainstorm an unedited list of the things that you want to do in your first 90 days, breaking it down 30, 60, 90, for example. As I described earlier, I interviewed my current boss, I interviewed my to be boss. But, so you could do that and upload that content, but also just edit, do a massive brainstorm of what you think that
Mhm.
you want to accomplish. You can also upload any notes that you took in your conversations with the recruiter, with team members through the interview process, and upload the job description. You could do all upload all of that and then ask the chatbot to use that information to organize lists of priorities that align with building trust in the first 30 days, earning credibility in the next 30 days, and demonstrating commitment in that 90-day window, and just see what you get. And then the whole idea is that it's not going to be perfect. You're going to
Mhm.
refine it and make it really personal to your leadership style. You're going to share it with your new boss for their input. Um, but there's all other exciting things that come to mind are you could break it down by creating multiple 30, 60, 90-day lists. You could ask it to suggest one list that is for your leadership with your boss and executive team. You could ask it to break it down into one for the leadership of the team that you'll be managing. So you could think about the different relationships that you're creating and design it that way.
I really love that advice. And, you mentioned in your book the marketing maturity model that I've used in
Mhm.
my last couple
Mhm.
of jobs. And I've spoken about it at AMA, wrote about it for Case. Um, if I were going to do one today, I would do, and I see it as kind of a checklist in a way. I mean, it's not, but
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
should be a
It's a
checklist
framework.
item.
Yes.
I feel
Mhm.
like,
Yes.
um, I would put AI maturity, the AI maturity of
Mhm.
your organization. I spoke about that for Enrollify in February. So if you go and look through Enrollify's webinars from their AI summit in February, you can see the framework that I developed for how to evaluate the maturity of your organization for AI. And I would think if you're coming in as a new leader, whether you're a VP, AVP, executive director, fill in the blank, that's a good place to get a baseline of where are people at, what knowledge is there, how are people using it, how is it being used beyond just sort of those real simple content creation, but being used for maybe data analysis, brainstorming, content scaling, fill in the blank. But I think getting a sense of the maturity of the organization you're leading in terms of its AI is a really good thing for a new leader to do. But it's also, I think, a good thing for any leader to be doing. Like if you haven't done
Hmm.
it yet, maybe you've been there for 20 years. It's not a bad idea to do it now.
Correct. It's never too late.
So, as we're wrapping up our conversation, I really want to close by talking about this really beautiful message that you have about paying it forward. And we've talked a little bit about mentorship and what that has looked like for us, both as mentees and as mentors. But I would love to hear what mentorship looks like for you today and why you think it's so important for our field.
I've been lucky enough to have benefited from both mentors and sponsors in my career. I mentioned a couple earlier in the conversation. Sponsors, as you know, being leaders in any role who have power to recognize you for opportunities when you're not in the room.
Hmm.
Mentors tend to be in roles that we want to pursue, or they are people who know us well enough to challenge us and have the courage to help us have the courage to create a plan for success, offering sound advice along the way. And I think that, building social capital in the workplace takes intention.
Mm.
That's part of the premise of my creating a 30, 60, 90-day plan. And having a mentor is one step to a career long span of building and nurturing that social capital that we need to learn and grow, move up, and sometimes move on. And there are a couple ways that I go about it and offer when I offer advice for people who are looking for mentors. But the first step is finding the right person for you. Ask them if they would be willing to give you a specific amount of time, like an hour a month for 6 months. That's a good start. It doesn't feel overwhelming, like you're asking them to, watch over you forever. um, but really important, I believe, in the effectiveness of mentoring is collaborating to create a structure for your time together. So in the spirit of creating checklists, create checklists of questions that you want to ask of the mentor. Ask the mentor if they have leadership assessments that they would recommend. And you should be careful not to give your mentor assignments, but do ask them to give you assignments. You're trying to find a mentor who is experienced in your field. They will have a wealth of knowledge that they'll be happy to share with you, whether it's articles, books, podcasts that they recommend. And I think mentors are especially important now in the nature of higher education because our industry and our roles as marketers are evolving so much and so quickly. So I think mentoring relationships are important for nurturing the next generation of leaders.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, in whatever stage you're at, I think mentorship is needed. Even if you're
Mhm.
at the vice president level, I think as a solopreneur, we launched our businesses like within a couple of weeks of each other. I think,
Mhm.
having mentors that we have for to help us guide ourselves through our business. The people when you're early in your career, maybe you have mentors at various stages. I
Mhm.
absolutely agree that they're super essential.
And you can have one, you can have multiple. I like, the idea that if you have more than one person that you can call on and develop a mentoring relationship with them, try to pick people who are different and can offer different strengths and different perspectives. It's like creating your own board of advisors. The other thing that I think is really important where mentoring can play a pivotal role is navigating organizational politics, right? Hello, shared governance at colleges and universities. It's
So true.
complicated. It's complex and complicated and looks different at every campus. So, having an experienced leader who can help you understand the ins and outs of your campus politics. I think is especially helpful for developing leaders who are looking to move up in the organization, or if you're a new leader coming to that campus.
I love that. And I also really want to put a little exclamation mark on the idea of if you're in a new role as a VP and you have the previous VP reach out and say, hey, if you have any questions, please let me know. Take them up on that. Every
Yes.
time I have done that, they have pointed out that there's a pothole over here. There might be some issues there. You need to know this about this person. This person's going to pressure the department to do this. I've told them no 1,000 times. You don't have to do what the person said, but you're going to sort of start to excavate some potential challenges, some potential issues, some potential. You can even identify those high potential people on the team where they're like, this person is going to seem really quiet to you, but they are phenomenal. That kind of stuff. Always take advantage of those opportunities, like a
I
million percent.
I totally agree, 100%.
This has been such a great conversation, Melissa. As always, chatting with you is always a pleasure. Where can people find you and where can people find your book?
I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I am one of the people who created a LinkedIn account from the very beginning. So it's my favorite leadership platform. So I'm on LinkedIn as Melissa Farmer Richards, and my business, iMarketingMix, has a separate page. I'm on Blue Sky Social as Melissa Richards, and on Instagram as iMarketingMix. I have a weekly leadership checklist I mentioned earlier that I mail out every Monday morning. So you can find a link to subscribe there on my LinkedIn profile.
Awesome. That's fantastic. And listeners, as always, you can find me on LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt, Jaime, or on my website, which is solvehighered.com. You can subscribe to my newsletter there as well. And if you are interested in my book, Heart Over Hype, Transforming Higher Ed Marketing with Empathy, you can find more details about that at heartoverhypebook.com. Melissa, this has been so great. And as always, listeners, let's go bust some silos. Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry best as your hosts. Learn from Mallory Wilsey, Seth Odell, Jenny Lee Fowler, Eddie Francis, and so many other of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.